they missed it. Okay. And in the meantime, while people still are rolling in here, I see a good amount of people here. This is great. If you can let me know in the chat where you're calling in from, that would be great. I always like to see where everybody is calling in from. I see California, New York, Quebec, Minnesota, Michigan, Delaware, more Michigan, Philadelphia, Southwest Florida, Maryland, Mobile, Alabama. Oh gosh, so many people. Georgia, Croatia. Wow, welcome. Virginia, another one from New York City, Barbados. Oh my gosh. New Jersey, more New York City, Toronto, Houston, Virginia, Fort Worth, Texas, West Hollywood, California, North Carolina, Calgary in Canada, Los Angeles, Dallas. I'm going to be in Dallas in a couple weeks actually for a work event here. More Floridians. We'll get started very shortly here. Let's see. It's about 1 p.m. here. I'll give it maybe another minute or so, just and then we'll go ahead and get started. I want to be respectful of people's time as well. We got Washington, Brecksville. Oh, right by me. Thank you for calling in. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We have 51 participants so far. This is awesome. So if you have not muted your Zoom, please go ahead and do so just to keep the noise down as I'm demonstrating here. So this is how this is going to work. So in the next hour or so, I will be showing you how to repot a Phalaenopsis orchid, and I'll give you a bunch of tips. And this is I'm going to ask you to. I have just a couple rules here. So while I'm repotting, so I will entertain all sorts of orchid questions, whatever questions you have. But while I'm repotting, I want to keep the questions only to repotting questions. So if you have a repotting question while I'm showing you how to repot and while I'm talking, go ahead and type your question in the chat. And I have the chat up so that I can see people's questions. I probably won't be able to type because my hands will be dirty. So while I'm actually repotting, type any repotting questions in the chat. Then after I'm done repotting, I will take any other orchid care questions that you have, and I will answer them live for you here. And then also, if you stick around until the very end, I have a special little thing I'm doing. So if you please stick around to the end to find out what that is. I'll try to keep it to an hour. So in about, the next 58 minutes or so. Yes, and if you haven't muted yourself, please go ahead and mute yourself. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to actually repot this orchid. Now, some of you, I'm sure, may already be wondering, well, that one is still blooming. Why is he repotting it? So typically you don't, it's not the best time to repot while your orchid is in bloom, but this one is basically almost done. This one has actually several flower stalks. I cut one off. It has three left, but there's only one flower on each one. Now you can see actually this one is reblooming. So I'm sure, if everybody has been following my videos very closely, you know very well how I like to trim the flower stalks in order to encourage rebloom. And here you can see a secondary flower spike forming. Now, the reason I'm reblooming, the reason I want to repot, excuse me, this one is because I don't like how this is potted up. This kind of has, well, you can see here. Can everybody see that? It's got this, I don't even know what this is. If it's made out of peat or whatever. It's another covering that they place all around the pot. So I can't see the roots. So I don't really like that. And if you are a beginner in caring for Phalaenopsis orchids and in repotting Phalaenopsis orchids, you do not have to grow, it is not a requirement to grow Phalaenopsis orchids in clear plastic pots. It's not. However, However, if I hear some feedback, if you can please mute yourself if you are not on mute, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Unmute myself.
So here, I think I muted David there. There we go. Okay, so like I said, it is not a requirement to grow in clear plastic pots. However, if you are a beginner in orchid care and you're just getting used to growing orchids, it makes it a lot easier because you can tell how healthy your roots are and you can tell when you'll need to water. So I'll explain that in a little bit. And again, just a reminder, as I'm repotting, please go ahead and type in any repotting questions in the chat and I'll answer them as I'm repotting. Okay, so that's the reason why I'm repotting. And it's getting actually, everybody on this call, as far as I know, is in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's getting kind of late to repot your orchid. So I wouldn't do it much past, the end of summer at the very latest, because you want your orchid to adjust before the winter time comes. So this is the last event I'm doing. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to gently squeeze around and then I'm going to pull the plant out of the pot. And again, please place any of your questions down in the chat. You can see I have a root over here that's a little bit stuck. Sometimes if you break a root, it's okay. It happens. Here we go. So I was able to take this out. And this is what I don't like. I don't like this. It's probably, my guess is probably made out of peat. But I can't see the roots in this pot. And the plant's healthy though, so I wasn't concerned. But I want to repot this one. So I gently took these off. Um, and we have pretty healthy roots here. And let me answer. We have some questions already. Um, can we mix bark and moss? If so, in what ratio? That actually that's an excellent question. And I'll start off by saying this. There are so many growing mediums that you can use. There are tons that can work. You can pot your orchids up in just bark mixes, you can pot them up in just moss. You can use even a 50-50% ratio of bark and moss mixed together. The important part is that you can pick, it makes sense to pick an orchid growing medium that works both with your growing conditions as well as your routine. So, what do I mean by that? So, if you live, and now when I say this, I'm not necessarily even referring to the outdoor weather. I'm referring to where your orchids are growing. So, if they're indoors and you keep your thermostat set at 70 degrees, right, year round, it probably doesn't matter where you live because you know that those are your growing conditions. It doesn't matter what it's doing outside. Um, if you have really, really, really dry, warm conditions where your orchids are growing, I would recommend sphagnum moss because it holds on to more moisture. Now, if you live in, or I should say, if your growing conditions where your orchids are growing are a little bit cooler and really humid, you might not want to use sphagnum moss. You might be better off using bark, because the moss might take too long to dry out. So really, it's up to you. So you can try different scenarios and see what works best for you. Uh,
What?
does that answer your question? I'll keep
What do you
going
want?
as I'm repotting here.
I was busy. I couldn't answer it, and you kept calling.
Oh, if everybody can please mute yourself. Okay. Now, next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of this
All
sphagnum
right,
moss
I'll
off.
put him on my list. I
Okay.
gotta go.
Someone is still not muted. If you can please mute yourself. I may have gotten the last one here. Okay. So I'm going to remove this moss as I'm going to try and multitask as I'm answering questions too. I'm gently going to remove the moss. I do have a growing stake here that I'm going to remove right here. Just a flower spike stake. I'll remove that. And Someone is asking, is it okay to repot an orchid growing indoors, which was already repotted recently 2 months ago, if I think my mix moss plus bark isn't working well? Okay, so Maha, am I pronouncing your name correctly? Can you please explain in the chat? I'd like a little bit more detail as I'm removing this moss. Maya, okay, I'm sorry about that, Maya. Maya, can you please explain why are you saying it's not working well? I think I might know why, but I wanna confirm with you why that is. Um, so as we're waiting here, I'm going to remove all of this moss. Now, it actually makes it a little bit easier, and I didn't do it in this case because I forgot. I'm imperfect too. I don't do everything the way I want sometimes, but if you water your orchid beforehand, it actually makes it easier to remove all of the growing medium. Um, but this one will be okay. Um, now, um, the reason you want to remove the growing medium, and you might be wondering, how do you know when to repot? Um, and over time, what happens? I'll get back to you shortly there with your answer, Maya. What happens is your orchid mix will start to break down. Okay. Now, bark mixes, for example, will start to break down and they might even feel soil-like. So you'll have very small particles, the bark is starting to disintegrate. And then also, even if it's just sphagnum moss as well, the moss will also break down. It may not be as apparent, but it'll break down. It'll become more and more acidic, and that's actually bad for the orchid roots. The orchid roots can get damaged and they can suffocate and start to rot after the orchid mix breaks down. Okay, so that's why it's important to repot. Now, for if you have your orchids growing in sphagnum moss like this one, usually I wouldn't keep it in the same moss for more than I'd say a couple years. A lot of fanatic growers will actually repot their orchids growing in sphagnum moss every single year. I don't think that's necessary. You could safely do it every couple years. No issues with that. If you're in bark, you can probably get by with a little bit less frequently, maybe 2 to 3 years. But it's always a good thing to keep in mind. Okay, so I've got most of the moss off. I'm going to see if I can answer the rest of Maya's. Maya says, so she just repotted her orchid 2 months ago, and she doesn't think the moss plus bark mix is working too well for her, and she's saying it is a fairly old orchid whose bottom leaves started turning slightly yellow and limp, after repotting. The orchid hasn't bloomed in years, moved it right to the window 2 months ago after repotting. Started growing some new leaves, but the bottom leaves are wilting slightly. Okay, all right, that's kind of what I suspected. Can you give me an estimation, Maya, of approximately how much bark versus how much moss? Is it mostly bark? Is it maybe three-quarters bark and a quarter moss, 50-50? Okay. How are you watering? And approximately how often are you watering? Um, we'll start with that. Okay. As I am finishing to take off here the rest of this sphagnum moss, how does it look, folks? Um, the roots are pretty healthy, so we'll get to that point. I see a couple dead roots. Um, Couple more questions here. Is it okay to leave a bit of clay balls at the bottom of the pot before adding the medium? Absolutely. Why not? Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it's actually a good thing. I'm glad you brought that up. I've actually repotted orchids that had styrofoam peanuts. So sometimes, those packing peanuts, those styrofoam packing peanuts um, that people use for shipping. A lot of times, orchid growers will put them at the bottom of the pot, and the reason is because the bottom of the pot will be the last part to dry out, and so oftentimes the growing medium at the bottom of the pot will break down faster because it stays wet for the longest. And so by putting the styrofoam peanuts, or you can use the clay balls too, it'll actually, and the clay balls won't rot because they're clay. It'll actually prevent some of the mix from decomposing too rapidly. So that's a good benefit to that. Okay. So Maya said every 10 days, I leave it in water for 10 minutes and then let it drain overnight. Okay. So this is what I think. I'll answer this question and then we're going to get to potting this up in its new pot. Um, so what I suspect happened, and this happens very often, especially if you're just using bark mix, and especially if you haven't soaked your bark mix overnight, which is an important step. Um, and if you're not watering, frequently enough after repotting. So what happens is most bark mixes are really, really, really dry out of the bag. And so after you repot, oftentimes it's super, super useful to soak the bark mix overnight. But then for the first couple months after repotting, you have to water a little bit more frequently. So the 10 days might not be frequent enough. It's probably drying out too quickly. And so that's why your bottom leaves are starting to droop. So it has to do with the watering frequency after you repot. Now I have a special potting mix that I'll share at the end of this call that actually will help avoid that issue, and it makes it a lot easier. Um, Lena says, would you recommend 50/50 bark and sphagnum for Texas weather, dry and hot? Yes, that absolutely would be a good one. Or you can try the mix that I'll talk about towards the end of this call. Or you can even use just sphagnum moss. There are so many people that are so scared of sphagnum moss, but really there's nothing to be scared about, especially if you live in hot weather, if your orchids are growing in a hot, dry climate. If you're still scared, um, what you could do is do sphagnum moss in a terracotta pot. I have plants that are growing in that scenario that are doing amazingly. So regardless of where you live, um, it's a good setup. You might enjoy that, Lena. Um, Karen says my oldest Phalaenopsis has been in flower for ages, but the leaves seem to be suffering. Is it something I've done? Potentially the mix may have broken down. So if it's been more than 2 or 3 years since you've repotted, it could be potentially what's going on without knowing any more details. Okay, so we're going to put this in its new pot shortly. Herman says, "Do you stake when you repot to prepare for flower spike?" I don't add a stake right away. I'll add it a little bit later on, although there's no harm in adding it at the beginning when you're repotting. Okay, so I'm looking at my roots here. I actually have a pretty healthy root system. Um, and so you'll notice I'm trying to find some dead roots. Um, I thought, oh, here's one. Okay. First, let me explain the color of the roots, and then I'll talk about. I think I only have just a couple that need to be trimmed off, and that's it. Even if I don't trim that off, it'll be fine. But you'll want to trim off any roots that are dead. Now, when you feel your roots, as long as they're firm and round and plump, they are alive, regardless of the color. Now, you can see some of these are slightly greenish in color. That just means that they still have a little bit of moisture. You might notice after you water, your Phalaenopsis orchid roots will turn green. And then once they dry out, they'll be a silvery color, which is why I said in the beginning that if you're new to orchid care, stick with clear plastic pots because you can see the color of the roots and it makes it really easy to determine when to water. So now, you'll also see some of these roots are yellowish looking. So the reason that is because these have been growing in sphagnum moss, so light has not been able to penetrate the moss. So that's just a function of the light. So if the roots have been deprived of light for a long time in the pot, they'll actually be a yellowish color, but that's okay. So these roots actually can photosynthesize. So if you deprive them of the light, they won't be able to do that. That's why they're going to be yellow, but it's not going to harm the plant. Most of the photosynthesis is done by the leaves. Okay, so whether they're yellow or green, As long as they're plump and firm, they're alive. Now, you can see, let's see, I had one that was dead. So this one, oh gosh, sorry. Let me focus here. All right. Oh, see, this one just pulled right off. This one just pulled right off. You can see it's flat. This is this is just the velamen that pulled off. That part is dead. I didn't even need to snip that. It actually, oh, right here. Okay, you can see where this is where it came from. It pulled off of there. Now there's a part of the root there. That one's still alive. I'm just going to leave that. If you see anything mushy, um, go ahead and trim it off. I actually, oh, this one's dead. Okay. So this one, you can see this is going to pull right off. That one's dead. So I'm just going to go ahead and snip that. That's it. Otherwise, this is a pretty healthy root system. Um, let's see. Tara said, I just repotted a 3-year-old orchid that hasn't bloomed since the first year. I noticed the roots are green, but they're not plump. Like my other healthy orchids, they grow, but they are spindly. I've had it in bark mix and alive this whole time. Can it recover? Absolutely. Yes, it can recover. Remind me after I finish repotting this orchid, and we can get into maybe a little bit more of the details. Herman says, can you snip to maintain a pot size? Great question. Yes. Okay. Maya said, do you need to sanitize the scissors before? Yes, before cutting. I actually did that already with mine, but what I like to do, and then I'll revisit the other questions. This is just a bottle. This is just 70% isopropyl alcohol. So I'd sanitized these. I actually used these to trim. Now, really, if we're talking about sanitization, the best way to do it, because orchids can be prone to certain viruses and all sorts of things, the best way to really do it, and do I do this? No, because it's really not practical. I'm just being real here. Is to actually take a propane torch and then you'll torch the blades for, 15, 20 seconds or so. Just, practice your safety precautions. I don't do that though. I just use 70% isopropyl alcohol and I'll just spray. I already did this earlier, but I just spray the blades like that. It's not as good as using the flame to sterilize, but it's better than not doing anything. So great question, Maya. Tara, you're welcome. Remind me later. Um, okay, we'll answer one more question and then we'll repot into this one. How much bigger of a pot do I need to repot? Um, so let's talk about that, and then I'll move on to the next one. Now, you notice that this pretty much took up the whole pot, right? So I'm not going to put it back in here because I want to have a little bit more room for it to grow. Now, you don't want to have a huge amount of room, but a little bit of room to grow. And keep in mind that you'll want the growing level to be, you don't want to bury the leaves. You want it to be right under the leaves. And preferably, you don't want the leaves to be resting on the potting mix because you can encourage fungal diseases that way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to repot it into this size pot. Now, this is the original pot. You can see this fits right in, and there's maybe an inch or so around the diameter. So it's just a little bit bigger. Now, if let's say this orchid had a lot of roots that were rotted or dead, and I needed to trim a lot of them off. Let's say I maybe needed to trim this much off. Let's say all these were dead where my hands are. Then I can put it back in the same size pot. But in this case, since I have a ton of roots, I need a slightly bigger pot. So just don't go crazy. Don't go too crazy with the size of your pot. You want to allow a little bit of room for growth, but not a ton. Um, so let's see. Enid says, oh, Mary Beth says, do you spray the roots with 3-to-1 water hydrogen peroxide mix? I personally do not. I actually don't use hydrogen peroxide at all on the roots. Sometimes what I'll do, and if you're in my orchid care course, you probably know this because I talk about this product. Sometimes if I see, some you can use it out of precaution too. If I see some black areas on the roots or like black little spots, or you could just do this all the time if you want. I use a product called Physan 20, and I'll just spray the roots, and it's just an antifungal. I think it was originally meant as a hospital disinfectant, but at some point, someone determined that it's actually a good antifungal spray for orchids and other plants. But I've never, I see a lot of people using hydrogen peroxide. I don't use it on the roots myself. Um, do you put the aerial roots in the medium or leave them exposed? Great question.
What was it?
The question
Oh, aerial roots.
yeah, the question was, do you put the aerial roots in the medium or leave them exposed? Now this one, well, this one you can see there's an aerial root. I'm going to leave this one because there's no way
Oh,
I can.
yeah.
This one will break if I try to fit it in the pot. Remember, these plants are epiphytes. They grow on trees. It's perfectly natural for them to have exposed roots. Now, that being said, the best time to really repot your orchid is when you start. Now, this one doesn't have any brand new roots. Well, maybe this one. It's starting to grow. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of new roots at the base of your plant that are just starting to grow. That's a really good time to repot your orchid because those roots will then quickly grow into your new medium, and they won't go out into the air if you don't like that look. Now, if your aerial roots are really long, it might be a little risky to put them in the pot. And they might have a little bit harder time to adjust to the conditions in the pot after they've been exposed, to the air for months and maybe even years. So I would only really recommend that. I mean, you can put some of them in there if they're shorter, but if they're really long, I would leave them out. There's nothing wrong with leaving those roots out. Okay. All right. So now we're going to use this pot here, and I'm just going to do a quick test. So, um, so this is a pretty good size pot. And what I have here, um, this is a mix that I absolutely love. It's called the Treehouse Mix. I will talk about this. I just want to make sure I'm good on time. We have plenty of time. I'm gonna give everybody some information about this mix here. So this is a bark mix, but there's some other stuff mixed in. Now what I did with this mix, for most bark mixes on the market, I find that you have to soak them overnight. Sometimes I even soak them for 2 days. With this mix, you don't have to do it that long. That's why I love this mix. And there's other benefits. I'll get to that shortly. If you soak this for half an hour, that's plenty. That's plenty. So this is a good happy medium between, most bark mixes and sphagnum moss. So it won't dry out. It won't dry out as fast as most bark mixes, but it'll dry out faster than sphagnum moss. So it's a good happy medium. So I'm gonna put some here at the bottom first to start with, because we have a little bit of room. This one also has the clay balls or leca as well in here. Then I'm gonna go, it seems pretty good here, because I want to stay right below where the leaves are. And I think someone also asked, is it okay to remove some of the lower leaves? Only if you have to, um, especially if they're healthy, and especially if your plant doesn't have many leaves, I would leave them. If you have a really healthy plant like this one, and let's say, maybe you have one or two at the base that maybe you need to get rid of, and maybe you have some space on the stem and you want to really bury it a little bit more, then it won't really hurt the plant. But in general, I try not to remove any leaves as long as they're healthy, in general. Okay. So I'm going to keep repotting here. I'm going to move this moss over to the side that I removed. This won't take that much longer, and then I'll take some other orchid care questions that are not related to repotting as well. So what I'm going to do now is, this works better with sphagnum moss this way, but what I like to do is I kind of like to put some of the medium inside here, kind of in the middle. It's kind of messy. This will just make it easier so I don't have to put all my fingers in and get all the bark mix after I go in the pot. And then I'm just going to kind of turn it over to the side. So this way I have some medium in the middle there. It just makes it a little bit easier. Okay, I'm going to adjust just so everybody can see here. And the rest is pretty simple. So I'm just gonna add the potting mix. I'm just gonna keep turning it around. I can't see the questions right now, but I'll get to more questions shortly. Let me just finish this here. Just um, gently use your fingers. Now you can also use you can use latex gloves if you want. It's probably better, honestly. I'm just showing you how I redo it or how I repot myself here. So just use your fingers, get all of the potting medium um, in contact with the roots. You don't want to leave much, you don't want to leave, large areas where you don't have any potting mix. You want the mix to be in contact with the roots. So very gently. Okay, I'm almost done here actually. This actually wasn't too bad at all. All right. And notice I'm not burying the leaves. So I want the level of the potting mix to be below where the leaves are. Okay, now let's take a look. It's a little tricky here. Okay, I can get more potting mix here. Now, this is a little wobbly actually. And I can't remember who it was, but someone said, can you put a stake in the pot
Mm-hmm.
when you're repotting? So I'm actually going to do that. I normally don't, but this will help actually oops, to keep the plant stable. And I don't know what happened to my clip. I'm going to steal one from my other orchid. Hang on. Okay, so I just took one of these clips here and I'm going to just clip one of the flower stalks there. And now it's nice and stable. Okay, back to the orchid. So this area needs more. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Actually, very gently, go ahead and add some more. There we go. It should be pretty good. And I think the rest of it is pretty good. So you can see again, the level of the potting mix is below the leaves. And I'm going to rotate the pot. And I don't have any huge air gaps there. Now there's still plenty of air because of the nature of this mix. But you don't want any, large areas in the pot. And honestly, that's all it takes to repot the orchid. Now I want to, well, I'll get to the other questions next. You have a couple options at this point. You remember from the beginning? I'm just gonna mute a couple people here. If you remember from the beginning, you don't have to use clear plastic pots, but they do make it easy if you're a beginner. So by all means, that's totally fine. You can leave them as is, like this, or as everybody knows, when you buy orchids, they're often slipped in a decorative container like this, or another option, you can even use, if you really want, the roots to get light, um, you can put them in a clear vase like that as well. So you have many options. Um, okay, so I want to answer everybody's questions. Do you spray a diluted Orchid Plus solution when watering plant and moss? So I actually have um, so I don't, so you're saying in the watering, okay, so Okay, so for fertilizing, I actually fertilize with every watering. So I don't use, I know some people use that Miracle Grow Orchid Mist. I don't use that. There's nothing wrong with using that. I just don't use that one. However, I do fertilize with every watering. So every, almost
Oh,
almost year round. So very dilutely. So for example,
absolutely. So, for example,
everybody can mute themselves. Thank you. Um, the okay, so if the fertilizer label says a quarter teaspoon to a half a teaspoon per gallon of water, let's say, at every watering, that's what you can use. Just use that. If it says once a week, if it says, a teaspoon per gallon of water once a week, I usually dial it down maybe to half a teaspoon per gallon of water, and I use it at every watering. Then every 3 or 4 waterings, every month or so, I'll just use plain water. And the reason is that the excess fertilizer salts can then flush out of the potting mix, because that if they accumulate, it can actually damage the orchid roots. Um, so Angela says she bought a spray that's supposed to be just for the leaves. Should I use this instead? And you can. I experiment. I like to experiment, so I encourage everybody to experiment. Maybe try a certain product with some orchids and try a different product with others, and then you can compare. But I'll tell you which products I like to use. In a few minutes here, after I answer some more questions, I'll give you some more details for there as well. What is the mix you're using, please? It's called the Treehouse Mix. I'll include a link in the chat here shortly with that information. I just want to make sure I'm answering everybody's questions first before we get to that. How do you fertilize after following your suggested mixture? Do you soak or dry? That's a great question. Or just water. Okay, so what I like to do, so if I have any kind of bark mix, um, hang on, just want to get my water. My throat's getting dry. Okay, for any type of bark mix, I prefer the soaking method. So, and then I'll talk about sphagnum. So let's say, I have my plant growing like this. This is on my windowsill. So what I'll do, I'll add water. So, you know, like everybody's familiar with, right? This does not have drainage holes. This does, very important. I'll put this in here. I'll fill this with water and I'll let it sit, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Then I'll take this out, dump the excess water, let this drain, and put it back in. So that's how I water orchids in bark. Now, you could also top water. You don't have to soak, but I feel like you get a better watering that way. Now, if you have orchids growing in sphagnum moss, like this one that I just had, I don't soak. And the reason is because sphagnum moss will absorb a ton of water. And so it'll just absorb too much water. So I just like to top water it like any other normal houseplant. Now, these are not normal houseplants. Um, any normal houseplant. Top water it, and I like to do it in the sink, but then wait a few minutes. So let's pretend that this isn't sphagnum moss. I'll put it in my sink. I'll just top water with my watering can all over and let it drain. So moss tends to drain a little bit slowly. So let it drain for a few minutes in your sink. Because if you don't do that, if you don't let it drain for a few minutes and you put it back, let's say you top water it and then you put it right away back in its decorative pot, it'll just slowly drain in here and then you'll have water collecting here at the bottom. And if you have a bark mix, it's not really a huge problem. But for orchids growing in sphagnum moss, it already absorbs a lot of water. And then if it's sitting in water, it's going to absorb even more. So that won't be ideal for that. Hope that answered your question. If Jamie likes the clear vase. Yeah, it's just another option I thought I'd show you guys. Melanie says, so on yours, I see a lot of dirt bark. On mine, I see mainly roots in my clear pot. So I need to bump up and add more dirt. Um, yes, I mean, If the pot is mostly roots, it's likely been in there for a really long time, and I would suggest repotting at that point. Okay, and before I get to uh, Zorana's question about fertilizing, I do want to say something. Listen up, folks. This is really important, okay? And this is actually coming back to the beginning, or I forgot who asked. Someone asked a question of they repotted a couple months ago, and now the lower leaves have been drooping. Okay, so this has to do with watering. Like I mentioned before, it has to do with watering. If you're using, if you've had, a bark mix that you bought, let's say at a big box store somewhere, I'm not counting this treehouse mix, which I'll give you guys the link for that in a few minutes, right before we finish up the call. But I've purchased, for example, Better Grow makes an orchid mix. Actually, they have an orchid mix and they have another one called Phalaenopsis mix. So Better Grow Phalaenopsis mix. That's a great one too. But that one you have to soak overnight, even for 2 days before I use that one. I've switched to this actually since because it's so wonderful. Um, and if you use, these mass-produced orchid bark mixes, you have to soak them overnight. And the first couple months after repotting, you have to water pretty frequently, more than you think, because go ahead, stick your finger in there. If it feels bone dry after 3 or 4 days, that means you're going to have to water it again. So that bark has to be conditioned to accept water. Now, over time, it'll start to condition, and then maybe at that point with that bark mix, you might find yourself watering maybe once a week instead of every 3 or 4 days. I'm talking about just the period after repotting if you're using those types of mixes. Now, with this bark mix with Treehouse, it gets rid of all that. It stays at a good amount of moisture, but not too much. So that you, even after repotting, stick your finger in there and you can go by the color of the roots if you're growing in a clear plastic pot, or you can go by feel. Phalaenopsis orchids do not like to go stay dry for too long. They like to dry out, but they don't like to stay too dry because when they do, then they'll start to get dehydrated and suffer, and you're going to get the droopy leaves. The droopy leaves can also happen on the other end of the spectrum if you keep them too wet, and then the roots will dry. But that a lot of times it could be, that you're not supplying enough light. There's a lot of things that work together. Um, okay, someone said only to fertilize on sunny day. Okay, let me answer this question first. Do you fertilize when an orchid is in bloom? I actually do. Now, the reason it's okay is because I use a dilute amount of fertilizer. If your fertilizer label says, and I'll talk about, I'll give you all the fertilizers that I like to use. I'll give you guys a link towards the end shortly as well. But if you have a fertilizer that says to use it once a month at a certain concentration, in that case, it might be bad, to fertilize while in bloom. But if you're using very dilutely, then you really have, nothing to worry about. I've never experienced any issues with doing it that way. I think it only becomes a factor if it's too high of a strength. Enid says someone said only to fertilize when watering on sunny days. It is not good to fertilize on cloudy or rainy days. I would have to say it's probably that's a good, I wouldn't say it's a strict rule, but it's a good guideline that you can use. Um, and also for, because you're going to be watering and fertilizing at the same time. You're not just, doing one or the other. They go hand in hand. Um, and the reason that's a good rule of thumb is because your orchid or any plant for that matter is going to be able to use the fertilizer and the water more efficiently when there's more light. So really that's why it's a good rule of thumb. Um, Natural fertilizers that I recommend. Can I put banana peel tea on my fall? Um, so I personally don't use any of these, if you want to call them like home remedy type thing with, I know some people, use rice water and banana peel water. I don't, there's nothing wrong with that, except it could attract pests. So keep that in mind. Um, I just like to use a good formulated fertilizer because it has everything that you need. I'm not saying don't try it. I just personally don't. I personally don't like it. My keiki needs repotting. How do I remove them from the mother plant? Let me actually grab one. I have one right here that I'm going to show you guys. Okay. So I'm actually going, these are getting ready. They're a little small, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and do a video soon on this. Really, I'll just explain how I do it, how I like to do it. Usually I like to wait until there's a good rule of thumb, three roots, three leaves, and the roots, you'll want them 2 or 3 inches long. So this one has three leaves. It's growing right on the flower stalk. It's only got, well, this one only has one root. This one has two roots. So really all you're going to do is you're just going to, I'm not going to do it yet here, but you're just going to snip right on the flower stalk, right below the flower stalk, where the keiki is attached. So you can see where it's attached. I'm just going to trim right below. So you're actually going to have a little bit of the flower spike attached, and then you're going to go ahead and pot it up. Now, I recommend for keikis, I do recommend sphagnum moss. It's a really good medium to nurture the baby plant. Um, so that it doesn't dry out too much. I would use as small of a pot as you can fit the roots, and use fresh sphagnum moss. Never reuse potting mix for your orchid because, like I mentioned before, it'll break down. Um, so that's what I would recommend. How often do you water bark or moss? Okay, great question. The short answer is when you need to. The long answer is, I'll tell you after I take a sip of water. Okay. The long answer is this. If you have, and again, still going back to the clear pots, if you're, this allows your roots to get light, especially if you put it in a glass container like this. When the roots are hydrated, they're going to be green. So as soon as they turn a silvery color, go ahead and water. Um, so frequency wise for bark mixes, it depends, but for this one can be maybe every 7 to 10 days or so. Again, depending on your conditions. For orchids growing in moss, I have one in my kitchen that's in front of a southern facing window that's growing in moss, and that one can go even 2 to 3 weeks before it needs to be watered. That one's in a clear plastic pot. Excuse me. And the moss it's still in the original moss that it came with when I purchased it 2 years ago. It does need to be repotted. Um, but that one will dry out a lot slower because it's in moss and the moss is pretty packed. And you know, in those conditions, and it's pretty packed in there. So moss will dry out a lot slower than bark. So you're going to find yourself watering a lot less frequently um, for orchids in moss versus for those growing in bark. Um, so my newest orchid arrived looking pale green and the flowers did not last. Suggestions. Um, so as far, I'll comment a little bit on that. If this doesn't answer your question, send me a message later. Um, so when you're buying an orchid, so if this was in shipping, if this was in bloom while it was in shipping, the shipping probably stressed the plant out, and the flowers probably won't last as long. So that's one reason why the flowers aren't lasting as long. Now another reason, if you're going to the store and you're buying, let's say, an orchid where all of the flowers are open. There are no unopened buds. All of the flowers are open. You don't know how long the flowers have been lasting, or I'm sorry, how long the flowers have been open. They could very well be near the end of their lifespan. So a lot of times when people take them home and they're in full bloom, all the flowers are open. Sometimes they don't last as long because you don't know how long they've been opened. There's no way to tell until they start to wilt. Um, So keep that in mind. I always like to look for orchids that have some unopened buds at the tip of the flower spike when I buy them to ensure a longer floral display. So those are some tips. Is tap water okay to water with? I try rainwater, but can't always. Great question. Tap water, where I live, we actually have pretty good tap water. I know there's people from New York City on this call. New York City has amazing tap water because of the source, the source of your water. It's pretty low in what's called total dissolved solids, and that's what orchids like. Orchids don't like a lot of hard water. So if you live in New York City, go ahead and use that tap water. Mine isn't as good here, but it's still pretty good. They say that if your total dissolved solids, so you can actually get a meter. I have a zero water filter that came with it's a water filtration device. Similar, you just put your tap water in and it drains through a five-step filter. That actually comes with a dissolved solids meter, so I measure it with that. But they say, if your total dissolved solids are under 200, you're pretty good. You don't have to worry about it. Although rainwater is better. If you have a water softener at home, don't use that because sodium that replaces some of the minerals in the tap water with sodium. That's bad for orchids or any plants. So just a couple things to keep in mind. Can your favorite mix be found in Europe? Unfortunately, no. They only ship to the United States. Um, but but like I said, there are no magic potting mixes. The key is to learn how to water. That's the key. Now, you could pick a mix that'll make your life easier, but many mixes and many configurations of potting mixes and pots can work. You just have to learn how to water. Um, East-facing windows is best, but what if you don't have an east-facing window? Great question, Mary Beth. Um, where do you, so depending on where you live, as long as you don't live in if you live in a horrible climate like I do, I live in Ohio, in Northeast Ohio, or we have horrible winters, cold, dark winters. Southern facing windows are fine. A lot of people get so scared of giving their orchids enough light. I'm sorry, that they're scared of giving their orchid direct sunlight. Now, if you live in an area that has, oh, sorry, I'm going to close this door. My dad is going crazy. Sorry about that. If you live in an area that has really strong sun, or if you're near the equator, or you live in Arizona or Florida, really strong sun, you might want to avoid midday direct sun because it's the strongest. So maybe anywhere from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Try and avoid that. If you live in a horrible climate like I do, south-facing windows are fine. So don't be scared of direct light. People get scared because their orchids are burning. Now, in most cases, in most cases, Phalaenopsis orchids burn not because they're receiving direct sun indoors. I'll talk about outdoors in a second. And then we're going to have to wrap up shortly. I have some information to share with everybody. Um, if if your orchid burns, it's usually due to your plant not being acclimated to higher light slowly enough. So if I purchase a plant that's been sitting at a Home Depot or Lowe's and it's been sitting in dim light, indoors for a long time, and then I suddenly place it in a window where it receives, several hours of direct sun, it probably will burn. So you have to do it slowly. So if you don't have an east-facing window, you can place it in front of a southern facing window, or if you live in an area with really strong sun, you can close the blinds maybe a tiny bit to diffuse the sun, or you can use sheer curtains. You can use west facing windows as well. If you get late afternoon direct sun, that's fine too. Um, if you have light's a pretty complicated topic, but if you have a north facing window that gets no sun at all and the window is small, it might not be enough light. So there are options. There are definitely options. Um, Couple more questions, and then I have some info to share with you guys. What if you didn't soak the bark prior to repotting? Can you soak the plant and bark to help the leaves not droop? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So if you didn't soak the bark ahead of time, soak the bark, 10 to 15 minutes, like I mentioned, or even longer. Even half an hour, that's fine. And then a few days later, 3 or 4 days later, stick your finger in there. If it feels bone dry, go ahead and do it again. Don't be scared of the frequency. If it's dry and it needs water. So absolutely, it's not a lost cause if you didn't soak the bark. Judy Thompson said, I highly recommend taking Raphael's Master Orchid class. Thank you so much, Judy. It is full of all sorts of wisdom and definitely worth the small cost. He is a master. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed that. Um, yes. Oh gosh, I feel bad here. Let me do this. Let me do this. Let me share my link and I'll try to get to more questions. I will answer the rest of your questions as long as you're remaining on the call. I'll go ahead and answer those questions. I wanted to share something with you guys, something special with you in the chat. So, because, okay. All right. In the chat right now, I shared a link on my website. Um, and I know some of you might have my Orchid Care course now. Um, I'm just going to mention a couple things and I'm going to answer the rest of your questions. Um, so I have a special offer here, and I'm missing one thing here. I know some people do have my course, and thank you, and I'm glad you're enjoying it. If you've been interested in my course, I actually set up, if you click the link in my profile, it's valid until the end of the evening, Eastern Standard Time. I have a coupon for $50 off of the original price of the course. And for the first 5 people that purchase, this is actually a proof copy. That's why you see this here. For the first 5 people that do not own the course, if you purchase the course, you can also gift it as well. But if you purchase the course before the end of the night, I will personally mail you this journal that I created. It's called My Orchid is Judging Me, a Journal of Mutual Disappointment. And the reason I created this is because it really pays to track what you're doing with your orchids, especially as you become crazy like I am and you get a ton of plants. It's hard to keep track of things. So what I've done here, now there's not very, most of the pages are blank, but there's a few pages in the very beginning that that kind of give you tips about what to do with your orchids in different seasons, fall, winter, spring, summer. And then also the types of things that you can track in your orchid care journal. Most of the pages are empty. So the types of things that you can track. Now, I recommend adding a plant tag with the date of when you repotted, and that also says, what type of mix you used. Then let's say you can call this orchid number one, or if you want to name your orchid a name, that's fine too. Call it Sarah or Jim or whatever. I know people like to name their plants. I don't, but that's fine. Write it on your orchid tag and then write it in your book. You can have an entry for each orchid and you can keep track of when you last repotted, what orchid mix you used, how often you fertilize, what fertilizer you used, and where you keep your orchids. There's so many things. So the first 5 people that purchase before the end of today, I will personally mail this to you. So I'll be in touch by email. And then in the link that I also have, I have the treehouse mix. There's a link in there, so just search for the treehouse mix, and it'll automatically give you a 10% off coupon as well. So that company is amazing. I use a lot of their potting mixes. It's a small business actually based out of Washington. I'm friends with the owner. She's incredible. And this, again, the reason I like this treehouse mix, it's so awesome, is because you only need to soak it. I only soak it for half an hour before using. And then you don't have to do the frequent waterings after you repot because it's airy enough that it'll retain just the right amount of moisture. So you can get by with watering this one every 1 to 2 weeks or so. Stick your finger in there. As soon as it feels mostly dry, go ahead and water, or go by the color of the roots, like I mentioned earlier. So those are some tips. And then I also have in the link, and then we'll get to the rest of the questions, my orchid Amazon shop with all the products. I actually use all of those products. So the fertilizers, I have grow lights in there. I'm going to do some content on grow lights soon. But I have all the products that I like to use in there. So Please feel free to peruse there. Okay, let's get to more questions. Um, I will stick around as long as you guys are asking questions on this call here. So let's see what else. Um, let's see. When you mix the fertilizer with the tap water, can you reuse the mixture, or should it be a new mixture every time? This is Judy. I just researched this and found it best to mix what you need at one time, then remix fresh for next use. Yes, I would recommend the same. I would just use as much as mix up as much as you need, or prepare as much of the potting mix as you need um, at a time. Okay, I had Unadi says I had repotted my orchid in regular potting mix in a pot with no holes, and now all the leaves have turned yellow except two, but all the flowers are still in bloom. I took it out of the soil and trimmed the roots. Now there are only a few small roots left. Do you think if I repot this with proper mixture, my plant will survive? Yes. Yes. So don't use regular potting soil. Don't use just regular indoor potting soil. You could actually get by with it. It's just too tricky. I don't recommend it. Stick with a bark mix or moss, sphagnum moss. I have a really good sphagnum moss in my in the link that I shared with you guys on my website. New Zealand sphagnum moss is amazing. The one I like is from Better Grow. Better Grow Orchid or Phalaenopsis or Orchid Moss, I think it's called. It's actually from Chile. It's wonderful stuff. So yes, you can. I would trim off all the dead roots, and orchid roots need air, so that's why regular potting soil generally is not good to use for that. So definitely, it can definitely come back. Just be careful. Be careful with your watering. For ailing orchids or orchids that barely have any roots left, sphagnum moss is actually a really good medium for that. Um, but put it in a small pot. Put it in a very small pot. Pre-moisten the moss, squeeze the water out, and put it in a small pot. When the surface feels dry, then go ahead and water. It's actually a good nurturing medium for roots that or for plant orchids that need to grow roots. Can you bring back a droopy leaf orchid back to life? Yes. However, if the leaves have already started to droop, those generally will not undroop themselves. If that's not a word. They'll generally stay pretty droopy and wrinkly. Oftentimes you'll see that they're wrinkly as well. However, droopy leaves means that your roots have been damaged, either from going too dry or if your roots have rotted out and died. However, if you fix your watering, if you fix your watering, the new leaves will be firm and perky and not droopy. And the old leaves will stay, likely, they'll stay droopy. So keep that in mind because that's important. You might think, oh, my orchid's not recovering, but it is. If the new leaves are growing in and they stay firm and perky, then it's recovering. So keep that in mind. Eventually, the droopy leaves. A lot of people are scared to, or a lot of people want to cut them off. Don't cut the droopy leaves off as long as they're green. Leave them because they're still going to serve the plant. And in fact, I like to leave the leaves on the plant until they yellow, until they start yellowing themselves on their own, and dropping off. They'll drop off on their own, and they'll dry up and turn brown, and they'll just pull off very easily. You won't even have to, use any force. They'll pull off very easily. Now, the reason I say that, I mean, you can cut off the leaves when they're yellow. You can. Um, or, if your plant has a lot of leaves and they're droopy and they're ugly and you want to cut them off, you can, but it's still better to leave them because what the plant will do is some nutrients are mobile nutrients, like nitrogen is a mobile nutrient. And so the plant will actually pull these mobile nutrients from the oldest leaves or the leaves that are yellowing, and it'll go back to the plant. And then eventually, that leaf will dry up and it'll fall off on its own, or you can pull it off. So that's why I recommend leaving it on the plant. Now, as long as it's not due to a fungus or it has a disease, that's a different story. But if it's due to a watering issue, or neglect or rotted roots, something like that, that's what I would recommend doing. Yeah, someone says they use an Excel spreadsheet to keep track of things. That's great too. You're very welcome. Thank you so much. Love your channel. So happy to hear that. Thank you so much. My question is further up. Leona asked a question. Let me see. Oh gosh, I don't know if I can. Can you remind me what the question is, Leona? So I'm not scrolling down here um too much. Sarah says, "Thank you. You have changed my life." Well, thank you. That's so nice. I'm glad to help. Where can I buy? Oh, Lisa from Hawaii. Where can I buy this clear plastic pots? It's in my Amazon link, so I have a couple links in there. Repotme.com also has great clear plastic pots. Um, okay, skipped a few questions. Oh, Tara says, was reminding me about spindly, not plump roots. Tara, can you send me either on my Instagram or a Facebook Messenger somewhere? Can you send me pictures? It'll help to see the pictures. And I can answer that later on for you after I see the photos. Can anyone paste the link for the potting mix? I signed out and my chat got cleared. Here, I'm gonna post my link in there again for you guys to do that. Let's see. Thank you so much. You're very welcome. Snip roots. Okay, snip roots to maintain pot size. Okay. I think I answered that before, but I'll go over that again. If they're healthy, I would. You can. Um, if you have a lot of roots and you want to keep it in the same pot, you can. But I would say this: if you need to snip the roots, now, this is assuming you have a lot of roots and you just want to control the size. Personally, I would put it in a bigger pot and I wouldn't snip the roots. But if you want to snip the roots, I would trim some of them. Don't, trim just enough to get it back in the same size pot. But then I would spray a fungicide like Physand 20. And I would wait. I would maybe just keep it out in the air for maybe a day or so to dry out and let the cut part dry out a little bit before you repot it. And that's in order to um, make sure that your orchid isn't susceptible to diseases. It kind of allows the root tips to heal a little bit, especially if you spray it with the fungicide. Watering is key. Absolutely, Angela. You're very welcome. Anna says, I only thought orchids bloomed once a year until I started following you. Now waiting for my orchids to start blooming again. Oh, that makes me happy. Thank you so much. Okay, Leona says, I have some orchids that I repotted about 7 years ago in a large pot. 7 years ago. Okay, they're perfectly healthy and bloom every year, but are pushing up out of the pot about 2 inches. How much of the roots can I cut back to sink them in? They are flopping to the side. Okay, so so you can do one of two things. You can do what I just suggested with trimming some of the roots if you want, or just go up a pot size. Go up a pot size. Now, let me see if I have. I'm looking at my orchids that I have around me. So I think what she's saying is sometimes, well, there's really nothing I don't have an orchid that has that right now. But sometimes, let's say this is coming up out of the pot and the leaves won't be starting, maybe the roots, let's say the bottom, like right here is up here, and then all below is roots. So it's okay to bury that. It's okay. So I would, again, the level of the roots, you want it right below where the leaves are. So you can bury that area of the exposed roots in the pot. Now, if you do want to trim the roots at the bottom, before you repot, just follow, don't trim too many off. Just enough to get it back in the size pot that you want. Again, I wouldn't recommend this normally, but it's possible. You can definitely do it. I personally would just go up to a bigger pot, but if you have a good healthy root system, just enough so that
That's
maybe
what it's telling
when
me.
you put when you put your orchid, before you put it in the pot and you took all the medium off, test it. Put it in the pot, put the root system in the pot,
Yeah, I think the
just
other
see
side is all the people that work there.
that the roots are,
Yeah,
maybe just touching the bottom, or just short of touching the bottom. Don't trim any more off than that. Um, you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Next, and I am actually going to post this on my YouTube channel. So if you want to watch it again, you can watch it on there. You're very welcome. Okay, Catherine says, I have an orchid that has two sets of leaves. They are joined at the base. Do I put the whole thing in a bigger pot or do I separate? That's a great question. Um, so, oops, sorry about that. Let me show you something. So orchids, so I talked about the keikis here, right? Orchids can grow, or Phalaenopsis orchids can grow two types of keikis. So keikis are just these baby orchid plants, right? It's the Hawaii. If Lisa's still on, Lisa Dung, she lives in Hawaii. So keiki just means, I think it means child or little one in Hawaiian. So orchids can grow two types of keikis. They can grow them on old flower spikes like this one, or they can actually grow them, and I have one in the basement, so I can't access it right now. They can grow what are called basil keikis, which I think that's what you have, Catherine, and it's right at the base of your plant. So it's a brand new baby plant that grows right at the base. Now, um, oh, Maya has a basil keiki. Um, so yes, let's if you want to show that Maya and the grid, thank you for offering. Um, so we can take a look. So I would recommend so you can do either. So Maya's holding up an orchid right now. Thank you. So you can see where she's pointing. You can see there's a baby orchid plant growing there right at the base. And then the one with the bigger
Scene I have to go through.
is the mother plant. So in a case like that, for the orchid that Maya is holding right now, with the, because the keiki is not very large, because once they get their own roots, a lot of their own roots, then it becomes too difficult to tangle them apart. Because what you can do in that case is you can actually trim it off. Once it's, big enough to separate, but not big enough where it got entangled. Um, so you can do it that way. Now, if it's been a while and now your basal keiki at the base of the plant is now, big, then it might be a little bit too hard to separate at that point. So that's what I would recommend. Herman says, what is the biggest pot you have, and how old is that orchid? Great question. So I have probably most of them are in, I would say, 6-inch pots. I've gone as high as even 8-inch pots, but and those orchids could be, several years old. But you would be surprised with good culture and consistency. Consistency is so important in orchid care. That's what a lot of people struggle with, because most people don't have patience. These plants teach us patience. They teach us patience. If you can be really consistent with your watering, your light, you're paying attention to them. I mean, they really don't require too much attention, but the consistency and the knowledge of knowing the growing conditions that they like, and particularly light and watering, it's so important. That consistency and fertilizing over time, you can have amazing specimens in, a fairly short amount of time. And by that, I mean, even 2 to 3 years of consistent effort. You'd be surprised how healthy plants that you can grow. Um, I missed the beginning. When do you repot phals? Okay, so the short answer is you want to repot when they're actively growing. Typically, if they're in full bloom, it's not the best time to repot because it can shorten the lifespan of the flowers. unless it's an emergency. If your potting mix is broken down, if your bark is broken down, if it's been in moss for a while, and let's say it's looked good for years and then suddenly it's declining, it's probably time to repot. Um, then if your orchid is in full bloom and it's suffering, it has droopy leaves, the potting mix is broken down, then go ahead and repot regardless because it needs it. It's better to save the plant than, to have the blooms last a little bit longer. Um, so in general, after it's done blooming or, when it's close to being done, I know I repotted this one when it's still blooming, but it's close to being done. Um, and then late winter, spring, summer, awesome time to repot, especially when you see little tiny roots growing at the base of the plant. That's a wonderful time to repot. Even into the fall, but I wouldn't push it because you want your orchid roots to become established before the winter time comes. And if you live in an area with horrible weather like I do, cold winters, horrible winters, very little light, a lot of cloudy days,
Right.
Thanks
we
for
rival Seattle and cloudy days. You're very welcome. You're very welcome, Maya. Um, so you want your orchids to be settled before that. You want to avoid repotting in the winter unless you have an emergency. Or if you're growing, if you're growing your orchids under lights year round, they don't know what the hell the difference is. So you can repot at any time. So there's a caveat there. That's another story. Um, how long do orchids? If you can mute yourself,
Okay, we're gonna go.
I hear some feedback here. How long do orchids live? They can live pretty much indefinitely, honestly. Um, that they can keep going. You can keep them for decades even. Um, how often do you fertilize? I fertilize with every watering. So the fertilizers that I have in my Amazon links, those two fertilizers, and it also depends on the type of water. So fertilizers for tap water will not be complete fertilizers because tap water has calcium and magnesium. So there are certain fertilizers for that. And then if you're using a pure water like rainwater or distilled water, you need to use a complete fertilizer that has all the necessary nutrients. But I fertilize with every watering typically. And then every month or so, I'll just use plain water to flush out all the excess fertilizer salts. You're very, very welcome. Joanne says, when do you cut the flower stalk? Great question. So if you've been following me for a while, you know how I operate with the flower stalk. So after, when an orchid is done blooming, you'll cut, right below the bottom flower. So it looks like right here, the bottom flower, oops, was right here, and I can tell by the scar. So I'll go down to the node. You see this little triangular area here. That's the node. So you'll cut right in between that node and where the bottom flower fell off.
For generalized pain,
Okay.
1 to 10, 10 being the worst.
Oh,
Right now.
well,
So now that'll encourage
I
you
got
to bloom
knee pain from,
like it does, like you see
because I
here.
got knee replacement and then I had some more surgery to do.
We're gonna,
Uh,
if you could mute yourself, okay, manually did that. You can see here, this is what results, the secondary flower stalk, and it will keep blooming. Okay, but then after it does that, okay, this is the rebloom off that stalk. After it blooms off of that, typically then what I'll do is I'll cut the whole flower spike off. But as long as the spike is still green and your plant is healthy, you can keep doing that and keep encouraging rebloom off the old spike. But I usually only do it once. I usually rebloom it only once off the same spike, and then I'll cut the whole spike off. And the reason is because it'll allow the plant to focus on growing new leaves and new roots so that it can get stronger for the future. So because your plant will grow brand new flower spikes from the base of the plant in time, and it'll give it a chance to rest and grow more leaves and gather more strength. And you should get a better floral show that way as well. I hope that answered your question. Okay, Alexa, I'm sorry. She had a question. I have roots growing through the slits in my plastic pot. What's the best way to handle that while repotting? First off, I apologize. It was hard to keep track of the question. So I must have just overlooked that. That's a great question. What you could do, where's my pot? Here it is. Okay. So what you could do, so Alexa is referring to the pots that have slits on the side, or sometimes they have holes. In that case, I'll take a pair of pruners. I won't do it for this one to damage it, but I'll just cut the pot off. Cut it off gently, and then gently free the roots out of the holes. So I literally would cut the plastic pot off so that you're not damaging the roots. So that's what I would recommend doing. You're very welcome, Joanne. Does that answer your question, Alexa? Gwen says, I had to keep my orchids in. You're very welcome, Alexa. Okay, before we go back to Gwen's question, Alexa says, so if the roots are showing through the slits, is it time to repot? Not necessarily. So keep in mind, this is normal for them to do that. And also, personally speaking, I don't like those pots that have the slits on the side just because of that. And then, they kind of go crazy. It's good. The extra air is good for the roots. However, those types of pots, a lot of times it'll cause especially if you have bark, it'll cause the bark mix to dry out even faster than you would like. You're going to be constantly watering. If you could keep up with the watering, those types of pots are amazing because it's really great for the orchid roots. They're not 100% necessary though. I actually just did a reel today on that topic. But it's not necessarily a reason to repot, especially if you just repotted. Lukewarm water always. Don't use cold water. Don't use ice, please. Use room temperature water or lukewarm water. Okay. Gwen's question. I try to keep my orchids in 6 to 8-inch pots, but the leaves are pulling it out of the pot. I have spikes in it, but it is still pulling. How do you keep them from being top heavy? Can you send me a picture, Gwen? Maybe we can continue this. I think I'm going to have to ask a few questions to get down to the bottom of it and also see the plant because that also helps me a lot when I can see the picture of the plant. If you could send me either an email or a question through Instagram DMs or on my Facebook, Ohio Tropics Facebook Messenger, send me some photos and then I can help you. Oh, great, perfect. I can help guide you through that issue that you're having. Okay. Georgia. I live in Oregon, 35 miles in the mountains from Eugene. Our water causes hard water scale after time. Okay. Should I use bottled water? My friend uses ice on her orchid. We have agreed to disagree. Well, like I tell people, if it's working, keep doing what you're doing. But the ice thing, and I know we're on the same page, Georgia. The ice thing, eventually it'll fall apart, especially, when it'll really fall apart? When you go to repot, especially if you repot into bark, because a lot of people don't realize it's dry as heck. And, once you repot and you go into a bigger pot and you use new bark and you try ice, it's not going to work anymore. But don't use ice. If you've been following me long enough and you've taken my course, I don't recommend that. So Georgia's asking, should I use bottled water? You can. You can use distilled water. You can use reverse osmosis water, or in my Amazon link, I actually have you can use a zero water filter. I'll put it back here in case someone missed it. I just have some extra information, resources of what I talked about on today's call. It's a zero water filter, and it's almost as good as reverse osmosis water. It removes almost everything out of there. But if you use something like distilled water, or reverse osmosis water, or even rainwater, you have to use a complete fertilizer. So it has to be formulated for that type of water. So keep that in mind. Do I have other types of orchids? Yes, I do. I know I talk about the care of mostly Phalaenopsis orchids, but I do have many other kinds. And if you're interested, let me know. I know there's a lot of people already left the call. I went over quite a bit. Oh, there's 39 people still left. Wow. Thanks for sticking around. If you'd like other information, what other orchids to grow, maybe if you're ready to graduate from Phalaenopsis, there's so many different orchids. Um, the orchid family is the largest, don't quote me, it's either the largest or second largest flowering plant family in the world. There are a lot. So you can't really know them all, but if you want some content on growing some other types of orchids, I'm happy to intersperse some of that as well. You're very welcome. Um, so any other questions before we wrap this up? I will post this on my YouTube page. Um, so feel free to go back to that. I'll announce on social media as well. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, go ahead and do that as well. So I will post this so that you can watch this after. Fungicide. So I recommend a product called Physan 20. And it's great stuff. You can use it as a fungicide on the leaves as a preventative. Orchids can be very prone to fungal disorders. Um, Especially if you have like really humid conditions. Um, it can help with that. It can help prevent. And you can also spray the Physan 20 on the roots when you repot as well. It's wonderful stuff. But just keep following the safety precautions. Wear gloves, latex gloves, or protective equipment, whatever it says on the label. Any other questions? You're very welcome. You're very welcome, everybody. I hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for more. Glenda asked another question. I may have missed this, but what is the best way to feed and what product is it? Okay, I'll take this last question and then we'll wrap up here. So I recommended if you click on the link, ohiotropics.com/orchid, I have some resources in there, including my Amazon shop for orchid products, orchid care products. So I have a couple fertilizers in there. If you're using tap water, I love this fertile. This is what I use. It's called Orchid Plus. It's made by Better Grow. That's formulated for tap water because that fertilizer does not have any calcium in it, but tap water does. So that's why it's formulated for that. It's wonderful stuff. If you're not using tap water, if your tap water is really horrible, um, orchids do not like really heavy, they do not like very hard water. And like I explained before, the water in my location, it's pretty good. We don't have the hardest water in the country, so that's great. So that's why I use it. But if you have really, 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 really hard water, um, it's another topic, but we can talk about that at another time. And I would recommend using distilled water or reverse osmosis water or rainwater. I would not use if you have a home water softener system, a lot of those, what they do is they replace the minerals with sodium, which is toxic to plants. So don't use that one. But what did I say? Rainwater, distilled water, and reverse osmosis water. If you're using those, there's a product called Feed Me. It's made by Repot Me. It's in my Amazon shop link, and it's based off of the Michigan State University formulation. It's wonderful. It's amazing stuff. So for pure waters, you want to use that because or a fertilizer like that, orchid fertilizer that's a complete fertilizer because it has all the necessary nutrients. If you're using tap water, you can use Orchid Plus. That's a wonderful, wonderful one. You're very welcome. You're very welcome, everybody. Um, okay, so we're gonna wrap this up. If you'd like to see me do more of these in the future, maybe something not related to repotting, this is going to be the last repotting one for the year, but shoot me a message, DM me, shoot me an email, and you're very welcome. And then I'm happy to entertain that if enough people are interested in that. I'll do more of these in the future. So you're very welcome, Brenda. I hope you enjoy the course. So I will see you guys next time. I'll put this on my YouTube channel. Stay tuned, and stay tuned for more. Thanks for joining me today. Bye, everybody. You're very welcome.